I'm Sebastien Bezot, Director of Policy, Projects, and Media Relations of USJE, and I'll be your host this evening. So tonight, you will have the opportunity to listen directly from your national president in regard to the Treasury Board directive to return to work sites, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions or provide feedback. If you already have questions in mind, feel free to type them right away in the Q&A section, or you can use the raise your hand function, and we'll get back to you later during the presentation. Ainsi, notre présentation principale sera faite par David Neufeld, le président national du SESJ, suivi d'une courte série de questions et réponses. Let's begin by welcoming your national president, David Neufeld.
Hello, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us here today. I want to begin by recognizing that even though this town hall is being held virtually, we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. In particular, I'm joining you from the ancestral lands of Treaty 1 territory. These lands are the heartland of the Métis people and the territory where my personal residence is located in Winnipeg. Before we start, I want to thank all of you for the crucial work that you do every day in keeping Canadians safe. These last few years have been challenging, and you, our members, have continued to show incredible dedication to the safety of Canadians. Thank you. Merci pour votre dévouement envers les Canadiens et Canadiennes. This evening's town hall is related to the Treasury Board's directive on the recently announced return to work policy. This is a directive that the Treasury Board has said must be implemented by all departments and agencies by March 31st. As your national president, I have been very vocal about our union's strong objections to this directive, which requires all federal public service employees to return to the worksite a minimum of 2 or 3 days, no matter your role, your responsibilities, the agency or department. Even though Federal Minister Mona Fortier has stated that the return to office policy must consider the nature of each department's work and the services they provide to Canadians, we know the reality is the decision about the number of the days in the office and which days those may be is at the sole discretion of the employee's manager and/or director. Since the beginning of the pandemic, USJE has been a very vocal advocate with every department and agency about the transition to the new normal. We have insisted that USJE's members should have some flexibility to choose to work offsite when it makes sense to do so. There is no doubt that the pandemic has highlighted that some work can be done outside of the workplace when the appropriate technology is available and when employers are flexible and creative in their approach. USJE's position on the development of the new normal has been clear. All telework arrangements must be undertaken in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner. We have repeatedly said to department and agency leaders that there needs to be a clear structure in place to establish these telework arrangements so that it is not simply left to the discretion of a local supervisor who can make a decision without sufficient justification. We know and are already hearing that departments which do not incorporate a hybrid work environment as part of their new normal will not be an employer of choice in the future. After Mona Fortier's announcement, I published an op-ed in the Hill Times on January the 16th with the title, Treasury Board Directive Flies in the Face of Research on Productivity. Further, since the Treasury Board's announcement, USJE is hearing from many members who are struggling with the impacts of a hybrid policy. To those of you who have already taken the time to share your story, thank you. To those of you who have completed our survey on this directive, we so much appreciate it. The information you are providing will prove to be extremely valuable as we continue to meet with the employers. As some of you know, PSAC did file a policy grievance against the Treasury Board for unilaterally imposing changes to our members' working conditions while we are in negotiations for the 165,000 federal public service workers. PSAC's grievance states that the new return to work policy contravenes important articles of our collective agreement, as well as the health and safety provisions of the Canadian Labour Code and the Canadian Human Rights Act. The policy grievance is demanding that the government do the following: immediately rescind its hybrid work policy, immediately engage in joint consultation with the union on the return to workplace issue, identify all potential instances of discrimination that may impact members as a result of returning to the workplace for the union to review duty to accommodate as per Article 16 of the collective agreement and relevant provisions of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And finally, provide damages for any losses that might have resulted from the policy. With this in mind, if you are a USJE member who believes they cannot fulfill their obligation to return to the worksite as it is being implemented at your workplace, it is absolutely imperative that you file an individual grievance within 25 working days from the date that the policy is implemented in your workplace. It is important to know that filing a grievance will not stop the implementation of the policy. You will have to abide by your manager's directives in the interim, but it is the only way to challenge the violation of your rights. If you have never filed a grievance before, USJE can walk you through those steps. The reason for a grievance could include lack of access to childcare or elder care, owing to insufficient time to secure care and due to long waiting lists, challenges getting to the workplace, having inadequate transit or transportation, inadequate office space or broadband at the worksite, unpredictability about which days to be at the office in person, health and safety considerations for those who are immunocompromised or facing medical or related challenges on the part of themselves, a family member or other dependent, as well as you are working from home prior to the pandemic and are now being required to go into the office. Filing a grievance is an important procedural step that protects your rights. Ultimately, if the issue cannot be resolved directly with your department, it can be brought to the Federal Public Sector Labor Relations and Employment Board. It is also means that the employer must meet with you and your union representative, listen to the problems you are having because of the hybrid work policy, and provide a formal response about what they are doing to correct it. It is important to carefully document the return to work problems you are maybe having and any communication with your employer. Please keep email records and write down the results of any conversations you have had by phone or in person with your manager or other superiors. To file a grievance, immediately contact an executive member of your local, for example, your local president or your regional vice president by email or phone. If you have incurred expenses beyond the ordinary costs of attending work and or financial losses as a result of the return to the workplace policy, be sure to identify these damages to your union representative and keep records and documentation of those costs. Now, moving forward, USJE is wholly committed to continuing to challenge the logic and the value of the Treasury Board's one-size-fits-all return to worksite policy. Your actions and willingness to share your experience is extremely helpful to us. If you would like to share why the policy isn't working for you, regardless of whether or not you proceed with a grievance, please reach out to your local regional vice president or email your story at USJE communication SESJ@psac.com. In the upcoming months, USJE will continue to press each department on this issue and demand that we are fully involved in determining the new normal for our members. Many of the smaller departments we represent continue to see higher levels of telework. In fact, many of these smaller departments have seen members working from home for almost 50% of the time. Finally, if you want to easily send a strong message to the employer, please take the time to cast your ballot in the strike vote. In terms of the bargaining currently with Treasury Board, it's important to understand the following. After more than a year of negotiations, PSAC declared an impasse in bargaining in May of 2022 after the government made a wage offer of 2.06% per year that's completely out of touch with record high inflation over the past 2 years. The government then refused to compromise during mediation in September and the Public Interest Commission hearings in December. As strike votes continue for more than 120,000 federal public service workers across this country, PSAC and the federal government have agreed to resume negotiations with the assistance of a third-party mediator to reach a fair contract for workers. The Common Issues Bargaining Team will continue talks April 2nd to 6th, followed by the PA, SB, TC, EB teams from April 11th to 14th. All you have to do in order to vote is to attend an information session. Some sessions are being conducted in person, as well as some are being done virtually. Already, 30,000 PSAC members have registered for strike votes that are being held from February 22nd to April 19th. To consult the complete schedule, please visit psacunion.ca. Remote work has become a very important part of everyday life in our workplaces. Now it's time to look to the future by enshrining remote work and the right to disconnect in our collective agreements. Je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions et j'apprécie toujours les commentaires de nos membres. À toi, Sébastien.
Merci beaucoup, David. Alors, si vous avez des questions ou commentaires, vous pouvez les écrire immédiatement dans la section chat ou dans la section des questions et réponses. Comme vous le savez, notre président national est ici ce soir et nous avons aussi la directrice des relations de travail avec nous ce soir, Rebecca Thompson. Donc, si vous avez des questions, c'est le temps de les poser. En attendant vos questions, c'est à mon tour de vous poser 3 questions, nos participants et participantes. Alors, je vais commencer un tout petit sondage juste pour 3 questions. Alors, la première question, est-ce que le télétravail est une option que votre employeur approuverait pour votre poste? Oui ou non? Question numéro 2, depuis le début de la pandémie, travaillez-vous à 100% sur votre lieu de travail? Parce que il y a certains de nos membres qui ont toujours travaillé sur le lieu de travail, même pendant la pandémie. Alors, cette question s'applique plus pour vous. Et finalement, la troisième question, pour vous, est-il important de pouvoir bénéficier d'un milieu de travail hybride? Oui ou non? Alors, je vais vous laisser quelques secondes à répondre aux questions et je vous remercie de votre participation. Comme David l'a mentionné, on a créé un sondage pour obtenir des données de la part de nos membres sur cette politique de retour au travail. Et puis, on a reçu au-dessus de 700 différentes réponses de nos membres, donc qui nous donnent beaucoup de données qu'on va pouvoir utiliser lorsqu'on va rencontrer l'employeur. Alors, je vois qu'on a approximativement 60% des participants et participantes qui ont répondu au sondage. Ça fait que je vais vous démontrer les résultats. Pour la première question, is telework an option that could be approved by the employer in your position? 90% of you said yes, and 10% of you said no. Number 2, have you been working 100% in the workplace since the beginning of the pandemic? 20% said yes, 80% said no. And finally, is a hybrid work environment something that is important to you in the future? A resounding 90% of you said yes, and 10% said no. Thank you. So while we wait for your questions or comments, I'm going to go to you, Rebecca. So if I am a member, I don't know who my local executive is, I'm brand new and I'm having issue with this directive and I need assistance from the union in filing a grievance, what do I do? What are the steps to follow?
Thanks, Seb. Nothing like putting me on the spot. If you're having issues at work, whether it's around the telework guidelines or any other issue in the workplace, pardon me, there should be a union board somewhere in your workplace. Typically, they're in places like lunchrooms, and ideally, it will have the contact information for your local representatives. If you can't find that, or if you're working remotely and can't access the board, you can always go to the USJE website, and we have a list of both local contacts that tell you, based on where you work, who your local is and who the local president is that you can reach out to, or you can contact your regional vice president. They're listed, they are done geographically and by department, and they can certainly assist you and direct you to the correct resources.
Perfect. Thank you, Rebecca. So as I'm just going to give a few more moments for people to type their question, I'm just going to share my screen. And if you go on our website, usje.com, you're able to go under the Contact Us tab. You'll get an access of your national executive contacts. Like Rebecca said, they're broken down per region and per employer. And if you don't know who it is, you can go directly to the top. I'm sure David and Lynette would be more than happy to assist any member, and then they'll be able to put you in touch with our lovely RVPs that have been elected at convention. David, while we wait maybe another few moments to see if people have any questions, can you relate what you're hearing from members in terms of what kind of issues they're facing with this directive? I know we had a survey, we're still digging and analyzing that data, but I know you hear from members on a daily basis. So if you can share any of their concerns or thoughts while we wait for questions here.
For sure. So what we continue to hear, particularly in our larger departments or the ones that are considered operational frontline, as we know, the RCMP and the Correctional Service of Canada have made it very clear they are mandating people back minimally 60% of the time, which is 3 days a week. Some of the smaller departments that we represent are currently at 2 days a week. And then we also have some other departments that had created their own path forward on remote work and telework prior to this directive, and they continue to follow it. And I think what we're hearing mostly right now is because of this mandated direction, that most of the bigger departments at least are pushing more towards the 4 or 5 days per week on site versus going even at the 3 days. So by us pushing back on Mona Forche and also the departments and all the meetings that we have, we are trying to ensure that the flexibility that we've been demanding throughout the pandemic is maintained. And we know that even during the pandemic, there were some struggles at different sites. There was the lack of consistency. And I still am hearing that there's a lot of inconsistency. So I think that as long as we continue to push the departments for consistency and also asking for them to rescind the policy, which of course is going to be a Treasury Board direction, it's going to take some time. And I'll be very honest, I've heard nothing from Mona Forche's office. We have written to her asking for a meeting. She's not paying attention to that either. But I think a lot of this also is colliding with collective bargaining, which is why I think it's really important that people make sure they put in their votes in as we do this strike vote, make sure that your voice is heard, because at the end of the day, I believe that Treasury Board believes that this is something that may need to go through collective bargaining, but I am not convinced that that is necessarily the approach that we want to take as a component. I think that it would be best for us to push for a nuanced approach like we've been pushing for and ensuring there's as much flexibility as possible.
Perfect. Thank you, David. And in case you were unaware, we did launch, as soon as that directive was announced last year, well, before Christmas, really, USJE, we developed our own email campaign, which shows on the screen. So you can send an email to Mona Fortier to express your thoughts and feelings about this, that this should be rescinded immediately. We launched that in December, and we still have people actually sending that email. And we do have a few members that do it on a daily basis as well. So we like people committed to the cause. So that's available on our website if you want to take a time to send that email, if you want to take action. We did receive one question from Jeff, and here it goes, David. In the CSC community, we have members that work out in the community to fulfill their duties. It seems like there are some managers that think return to office means that we have to be sitting in our offices. Shouldn't work in the community count as office day?
Thank you for the question. So the quick answer to that question is absolutely yes. If it's part of your regular duties and you're out in the community, and in this case, you're talking about the Correctional Service of Canada in the community, and you're going out and visiting offenders in the community or collateral supports or so on, that would be a day in the office. And I can tell you that I have heard that across the country, it is differently applied at this point, and we do need to push for consistency on that. I have raised that at the national level with the Assistant Commissioner of the Human Resource Management, Jay Pike, and he is fully aware that we are of the belief that when you are out in the community, no matter which position that you occupy, if you're doing your duties, that should count as being an office day. And at this point, Mr. Pike has agreed with the position that we brought forward. And so if you are hearing of these issues or you're experiencing them, please make sure you bring them forward to your regional vice president, and we will make sure that we bring it to the national table to have those discussions.
Thank you, David. Now, if we can switch it to the RCMP, RCMP member employee here. I've been told operational support employees are being denied point blank, but they will not offer any documentation or elaboration. Is this correct?
So when it comes to the documentation of telework, there is supposed to be paperwork that is filled in. And if what you're telling me is that they are not willing to provide any documentation regarding their decision, I would ask that you bring that to the attention of your regional vice president. We do have a national labor management coming up with the RCMP on March the 1st. And that's certainly a venue that I'm prepared to bring that forward to push that and say, if you are making a decision or to ignore and not provide an answer, we will definitely go back to the department and push hard on them that they need to make sure that they're transparent in their decision making, and we will definitely be involved in those conversations, whether it's local or regional, whatever level it needs to go to.
Thank you. I don't know how you're going to answer this one. Why did CSC Commissioner Ann Kelly pick 3 days as a minimum? Why can't 2 be an option?
Yeah, that was one of the first questions that we asked, even back on when it was in the early time when it was announced on December 16th. I was fully anticipating that they were going to go to the full 3 days. Even at the time, they said, "Oh, we're not sure." Similar to the RCMP, it was kind of coy, but all of a sudden, boom, it's a 60%. But going back to the specific question, when asked that particular question, even at the National Labor Management and even outside committee work that we are continuing to do, the answer is because we can, and because we believe it's an operational mandate to have minimally 3 days on site. The logic still does not make sense to us. We have made it very clear that they are simply going with the highest percentage possible that the Treasury Board has directed. And in fact, there is no real specific reason given other than we have a mandate to make sure that we are in this case, when we're talking CSC and the institutions, the parole offices and the CCCs. So we will continue to push on that particular point because we don't agree with that. And that's 60%. And often, we'll even compare and say, well, we have other departments, smaller departments, justice as an example, where they're at 2 days per week, minimally. And what they're telling us is that they're prepared to keep it for a lot of those positions in and around the 2 days. So we will continue to push them on this idea that the 3 days is necessary, and to hopefully make some gains for our members in the coming month.
Thank you. One more question, and thank you, Laura, for putting it through, because I'm sure a lot of people think about this. What options do we have if the workplace is not following the recommended COVID guidelines? For example, masks, social distancing. So what do you do if you're a member in the workplace and those guidelines are not being followed? I know Rebecca said to speak to the supervisor, the Occupational Health and Safety Committee in your workplace. Anything else you would add to that, David?
What I would suggest is that if the rules that are presently in your workplace are not being followed, I would ask that you do bring it to your local executive, either your local president, someone there, or to someone on your local OSH committee. I think it's really important that that the rules that are implemented are followed. People do want to make sure that they're keeping safe. But what I will say that as I've seen across the country in my visits, there's a lot of rules that have already been stopped. So in terms of social distancing, in terms of the use of masks. And so a lot of these things have started to change already. And so what I would suggest is that if there is a health and safety issue in your workplace, it would be best to bring it to your local OSH rep or to your local executive member. Even if you're a local executive member and you're concerned, you could of course bring it to your regional vice president, and then we can figure out where we might take that discussion later. I don't know if Rebecca, if you have anything else to add to that.
But maybe before Rebecca does, can you I know what OSH stands for, but not everyone knows what the acronym
sorry.
stands for. If you can just
Thank
spell
you.
that out, please.
The Occupational Health and Safety Committee. So yes.
Okay. Rebecca, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
So like I answered in the actual question, in an extreme situation, if you're feeling very unsafe and that there's an imminent risk of major harm, that's what the work refusal provisions under the Canada Labor Code, commonly known as a 127 or a 128, are for. If it's strictly about COVID, it might be tough, but a 127 is more of a paper review type of question, but management has to respond to it. So it would at least bring attention to it.
Thank you. Thank you, June, for submitting the following question. It's appreciated. And Kelly also indicated those who needed to take the time to adjust to going back to the office, staff could take up to March 31st. But when asked, CSC managers said no. We were told to go back in 2 working days.
Thank you for that comment. And I guess it's a bit of a question on why was that. So when January 16th rolled around, we were very much aware through the committee work that's being done at the national level that CSC was saying that if people could come back right away, full to the full 3 days minimally by January 16th, they were supposed to do that. That was to be done without delay. And we asked the same questions about what's the transitionary period for then. And I think really what it came down to is that if there were individual circumstances such as childcare or elder care, those type of accommodations, that if they needed a few more weeks, they were supposed to go to their supervisor, and that was supposed to be considered on a case-by-case basis. And I also know that when it comes to the gradual return, it wasn't so gradual. In fact, it was very much pushed to go right back to in CSC's case, the 3 days minimum, and there was no wiggle room on that. And so if you have been experiencing, and there's might be people here on the call today that were not accommodated, even though they came forward and said, I needed more time, or I need more time to get these arrangements in place, as an example, it's really important to ensure that you did file a grievance in a timely way, and also that you let the regional vice president know, because if you let them know, this is another example that we can bring to the national table as well in our discussions and show how there is not the flexibility that they maintain that there is, and we will push on that. I don't know if you have something else, Rebecca, to add to that.
Okay, well, there's no more questions coming in. We'll just give you a few seconds if you want to type questions or comment or suggestion. But I'll just repeat, I guess the key message this evening is if you are facing any difficulties or challenges, please let us know so we can, 1, try to help you, but 2, also bring it up, deal with it at a higher level, at the national level if possible.